City Center Radio. It is episode 267, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, June 21st, 2024. Hello. It is the Friday episode. The weekend is here. I hope you all have an amazing weekend ahead of you. If you're looking for plans, go to holycitycenter.com/calendar. You can see what is going on, not just this weekend, but off into the future as well. No announcements up here at the top. No big news in my personal life. Been just normal, working, trying to relax, but haven't gone out to eat or done anything exciting. So nothing really to report back upon. Just have a quick episode today with a handful of stories to talk about. But yeah, that's it. A little low key one today, just to get you off on a nice start to get your weekend going. So all I will say here at the top as well is thank you for listening. If you enjoy this podcast, I appreciate any help you can give to not just the podcast, but the website. That can be as simple as just sharing a link. Hey, I think you might like this episode of this or this entire podcast series, or sharing a story on social media from the website. And of course, as far as the podcast, liking it, rating it, reviewing it, subscribing, anything you can really do as far as interacting with the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to, that's a big help. And if you want to go that extra step, you can go to patreon.com/holycitycenter and sign up for one of those tiers. That's a big, helpful way to offset some of the costs associated with running the podcast and running the site. I really appreciate everyone who's already on there, has been on there before, or maybe on there in the future. But enough about the self-promotion and selfish requests. Now it's time to get into the news. Been a few podcast episodes since we've talked about the Murdaugh family, but for once, we're not talking about Alec and what's going on with him. This is about his surviving son, Buster, whose actual first name is Richard, but everyone knows him as Buster. He is the 30-year-old, as I said, surviving son, for anyone familiar with this case knows that Alec Murdaugh was convicted of murdering his wife and his other son. So Buster, I'm talking about now, is the only remaining member of this family that is out and about in the world, as obviously Alec is in jail. And obviously I'm referencing the immediate family. There's other Murdaughs out there. But in any event, he was in the news because he is filing a defamation lawsuit against multiple media outlets. He filed this lawsuit in Hampton County. And basically his allegations are centering around all these different documentaries you've seen out there about the Murdaugh murders. So several of these documentaries and stories that were published on varying platforms are involved in the suit. And he is claiming that they attempted to link the 2015 death of 19-year-old Stephen Smith, who, if you remember, was found dead on the side of the road near the Murdaugh family estate. He is saying that these entities tried to connect him to Smith's death. And if you've seen any of these, you know that this has been brought up and has been mentioned, that talk around town, quote unquote, was that somehow maybe Buster was involved. And so he is saying just even putting that out there, especially since obviously none of them were charged, let alone they weren't even mentioned as a person of interest officially by any police, let alone charged with any kind of crime related to Stephen Smith. So there may be a case here, perhaps. It kind of depends on how it was framed, and we'll see how it all plays out, of course. So he has claimed that multiple media companies, including Warner Brothers, Netflix, the Gannett Company, and the Hampton County Guardian. It's a newspaper in that area, of course. Specifically, he mentioned their editor, Michael DeWitt Jr. So he said all those entities and Mr. DeWitt falsely accused him of being involved in Smith's death, and he's seeking actual and punitive damages plus the cost of the lawsuit. So when you have something like this, you have to say, well, why? Is this really affecting your life? And he claims in the lawsuit that his reputation has been irreparably damaged, and he has suffered mental anguish due to, quote, reckless conduct of the defendants in falsely accusing him of being involved in the murder of Stephen Smith, end quote. So, many of you are probably familiar with defamation lawsuits. You see them from time to time. especially when it involves like a celebrity or something. And so that's kind of what this is. This is going after these media entities, saying that they tried to link him to someone's death. He has always maintained his innocence and has no involvement whatsoever. And so he's looking to get damages. So there may be a case here, like I said, because he was never officially named a person of interest, or let alone a suspect, let alone being charged. So there's potential, again, depending on how it was framed. That's going to be a big part of it. And the other part is there any leeway because the family basically became celebrities? A lot of times celebrities can't sue for defamation for varying reasons, being in the public light and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see how this all plays out. We're way away from any actual update on this story, but when it eventually does happen, I'll be sure to let you all know. Speaking of lawsuits, Boeing back in the news. The outgoing CEO, whose name is Dave Calhoun, was in a Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs permanent subcommittee. That's a mouthful, but basically this is a subcommittee on investigations as it relates to Homeland Security and other governmental affairs. So he was giving testimony in front of that portion of Congress relating to specifically certain incidents that have happened with Boeing. For instance, the door plug that came off of a Boeing 737 MAX 9. You remember that door plug that blew off during an Alaska Airlines flight back in January. You probably remember the video with the big hole in the side of the plane where a door used to be. But they also talked about some of the other failures that they've had over the years. And at one point, Calhoun actually turned to apologize directly to family members who lost loved ones in two separate Boeing crashes. He did that actually during his opening testimony, which, by the way, took place on Tuesday of this week. If you've watched I think it was the Facebook was in one of these subcommittees, Mark Zuckerberg specifically, and one of the people on the subcommittee basically implored him do you want to turn around and apologize to these families where such and such happened because there weren't safeguards in place. So this was actually, he did it on his own. He wasn't implored to do, or no one made him do it, basically. So that was an interesting part of the hearing, of course. And then the rest was just him being grilled about these issues, why they happened, how they're trying to make sure this doesn't happen in the future, even though he's not going to be the CEO for much longer. It's basically what you would have expected to be. There wasn't too many big headlines that came out of it, but you can certainly go watch highlights or the entire hearing if you want to online. Now, something that made this hearing even a little bit more interesting than it already was, that just hours before he was set to actually speak in front of this committee, another Boeing whistleblower came out with some accusations. Senator Richard Blumenthal, who is a Democrat from Connecticut, his office identified the whistleblower as Sam Mohawk, who is a quality assurance inspector for Boeing, but not here in the North Charleston campus they have, but out in Renton, Washington state. So Mohawk alleges Boeing improperly tracked and stored faulty parts, and that those parts were likely installed on airplanes, including the 737 MAX, which is manufactured at the Renton facility. And now, why is Blumenthal involved, his office involved, if he's in Connecticut and this whistleblower works in Washington state? Well, it appears it's because Blumenthal is the chair of the committee where this hearing was happening. So it appears that's why he was contacted and brought into this. And yeah, this came out just hours before this hearing was about to start, which, I'm sure the CEO Dave Calhoun there was not pleased to have another person, especially the timing of it. But not that I'm feeling bad for him based on the failures of his company. They've been pretty catastrophic, as I mentioned, with airplanes crashing, causing the deaths of many people that absolutely did not have to happen. So that was the other highlight from that story. Like I said, if you actually want to go and watch the hearing, or maybe just the highlights, because these hearings can be long, and politicians tend to know they're on TV and they they'll grandstand and make a spectacle out of things. This isn't as wild as some of the other hearings we've seen recently, particularly the one with Dr. Anthony Fauci. But still there's a few of those moments. So you may just want to check out highlights if you're interested. But yes, that was the latest. Will any changes come out of this? Will the government either suggest or require Boeing to do anything differently out of this? Well, we won't know right away, but as always, I'll keep you posted on any developments that come out of this subcommittee hearing. And lastly, we have a pretty big update to that tragic story involving a car crash on Folly Beach that killed a bride on her wedding night and injured the groom and 2 others. The update is that a judge has awarded the victims over $1 million. I'll break that down in a little bit. They're not actually going to see the full million, of course. But for those who don't remember, the crash happened on April 28th, 2013, around 10 p.m. A vehicle rear-ended a golf cart around the 1200 block of East Ashley Avenue on Folly Beach. As I mentioned, the person killed in the crash was the bride, Samantha Miller, who had just gotten married to Eric Hutchinson earlier in the evening. I mean, just literally hours before. And the occupants of the golf cart were taking the newlywed couple back to their rental home when they were struck by a vehicle driven by a then 25-year-old Jamie Lee Komorowski. Now, Komorowski was charged with DUI-related offenses and had been in jail for months and months and months. Part of her agreement was she could be released with lots of restrictions if the trial hadn't gone to court by a certain date. That date passed, and so she is currently essentially on house arrest. She has like an ankle monitor. She's only allowed to do a handful of things, and there's some other stipulations regarding that release. So no, she's not in jail, but she's not exactly completely free to do as she wishes. So Hutchinson, who is the groom, and his lawyer, whose name is Danny Dalton, were in the Charleston County courtroom during this hearing that happened on Tuesday of this week, and they said that they were pleased with the settlement. However, a settlement has not yet been reached with all of the defendants, as there's litigation continuing with Komorowski as well as Taco Boy, which has a couple locations in this area, but specifically the one on Folly Beach. A little bit more on that in a moment. So the total settlement goes to Hutchinson, the estate of the bride who was killed, and the 2 other golf cart passengers. That total settlement is $1.3 million. So they're already, going to different folks. So it's breaking down a little bit. It's again, so not just one person is getting $1.3 million. But in addition to that, after attorney and legal fees, the total is actually just over $863,000. So $863,000 is going to be split between Hutchinson, the estate of Miller, and there's still some issues with that, and the 2 other golf cart passengers. $863,000 seems like a lot of money. Obviously, when you think about the medical bills, the trauma, and obviously the biggest part, the death of someone, obviously that money is no amount of money can make things right, but at least they're getting something. Now, in addition to those fees that I mentioned, taking some of that money away, another reason that the total was less than people were expecting is because there's a few things going on. One is the ongoing estate dispute, which I referenced before, that's happening between Hutchinson and the bride's mother, whose name is Lisa Miller. Back in December of 2023, Lisa challenged if her daughter and Hutchinson were ever legally married and asked to replace Hutchinson as a representative for her daughter's estate. So basically, she was asserting this marriage was only a few hours old when she died. Is Hutchinson really entitled to her estate? And for those who have been married or know how it works, like, when does it technically become official? Well, the paperwork has to be filed, right? So that was sort of part of that as well. So that's still out there. So that still needs to be determined. But in addition, as I mentioned, Taco Boy hasn't settled, whereas some of the other restaurants have. So there may be something that comes out of that as well. As far as the other Folly Beach bars that were included in the lawsuit, specifically, these are the ones that settled on Tuesday. That includes the Crab Shack, the Drop-In Bar and Deli, and Snapper Jack's. In addition, Enterprise Rental Car also settled, because Komorowski was driving a rental car the night of the incident. I'm not sure how they are involved in being liable in this accident. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but I'm just, how is the rental car company at fault here? Or is it just because, look, I don't know. I don't get that at all. No one's alleged that, there was a faulty car or anything. So I'm not quite sure why they're involved and why they would settle, but there we go. Now, there's still some stuff to work out with Komorowski as well. So there's still a chance for more money to come into play for all these parties. How to be divvied up is yet to be determined as well. So still a ways to go with all this. If you're interested in the breakdown of the settlement, Crab Shack paid the vast majority, $640,000 is what they are kicking into this settlement. The Drop-In Bar and Deli paid will pay $320,000. Snapper Jacks is paying that same amount. Enterprise Rent-A-Car put $240,000 in, and then Samantha Miller, that's the bride, she had a policy with Progressive that chipped in $75,000. So that's how that total breaks down. And again, still a lot of ways to go. The Taco Boy part of this lawsuit is still out there. The estate argument is still out there. So sadly, it's a tragedy, and it just continues to go forth with these issues and court cases, which has got to be tough for all members of the, whether it's the husband or the mother and any other family and friends that are involved. It's certainly a heartbreaking ordeal, and it just continues to have these twists and turns that, yeah, there's a settlement, but there's still so much more fight going on, not just against maybe another business or, there's still the court case for Komorowski out there and the fighting internally between the family. So that's the latest. I'll be sure to keep you up to date as there are any changes or new developments in this story. And that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio, and Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. Quick note, I forgot up at the top. I was recently interviewed. There's a podcast called the Charleston Marketing Podcast. It is put on by the Charleston American Marketing Association. There's this big group, American Marketing Association, and there's different branches of it. So this is the Charleston version of it. Sat down with them for like an hour chat. It was with Mike Compton and Stephanie Barrow. It was awesome. I had a great time chatting with them. They asked fun questions. We were laughing at times, joking about things. Yeah, we talked about Holy City Center a decent amount, but we also talked about some of the things behind the scenes, like how often am I using AI? What am I using it for if I am? How do I market Holy City Center if I'm not a marketer? There's all sorts of different angles that they took with the interview, and I think it's really good. So be sure to check that out. There's a post on holycitycenter.com right now with all the different links, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. If you're having a hard time finding it, just wherever you listen to podcasts, just search for the Charleston Marketing Podcast, and it's the most recent episode. Thanks so much for listening. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll talk to you all again on Monday, but until then, good night and good luck.